others describe it as racist and anti-Semitic, referencing her support to end DEI programs and belief that particular minorities.
Resistance is futile.
I love that. I love that. Hello and welcome to Soul of the Story, Book 3, Chapter 3. I am your host, Derek Tyler Attico, and I am here tonight with an incredible guest, the amazing, the wonderful Chanda Prescod-Weinstein. Chanda, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Hi, I'm so excited. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And I don't know if I should say doctor or captain or admiral. Which do you prefer?
We know each other like that. I think Chanda's good.
Okay. Thank you so much. So it's going to be a really fun hour, maybe a little bit more than an hour. I have so many questions to ask you. This is just really great. First off, I should say that you are, for those that don't know, you are a theoretical cosmologist and physicist with a specialty in dark matter. Is that right?
Yeah, most of my research in physics is focused on dark matter. I also do a little side work on neutron stars, although mostly that's using neutron stars to look for dark matter. So it all comes back to dark matter eventually.
Wow. I'm just excited. All right. And you have a book that's coming out. When is that book dropping?
So it comes out on April 7th. So I think that's 3 weeks from yesterday. It's The Edge of Space-Time. Particles, Poetry, and the Cosmic Dream Buggy.
So I've been reading, and let me tell you that this has been my friend. It's a highlighter. I've been highlighting the whole time reading, and I have your first book, which is a fantastic book as well, A Disordered Cosmos. And we're going to get into both of them. But before that, I would like to do a little bit of a rewind and go back to the beginning of your story and ask you, like, what was the spark that set everything in motion for you? Was that in your childhood?
You know, in terms of getting interested in math and science, my grandfather, my dad's biological father, was a machine worker who was also very prescient. He was a factory worker his entire life, but he figured out that computers were going to be the future. He was like very certain computers were going to be the future. And so like he bought a little Apple II, and I had access to a computer from a very young age, even though we were a fairly working class family. And he really encouraged that in me. I also remember he was a huge Dodgers fan. I'm a third generation Dodgers fan. And we used to watch baseball. We used to go to Dodger Stadium together because I grew up in East LA. And I actually, the first job I wanted was to be a baseball player. I was like, I want to play baseball. I want to be a Dodger. And I noticed that women were only on the field as ball girls. So I said, hey, Grandpa Norman, like, you know, can I be a baseball player? And he said, by the time you're old enough to play, they will let women play baseball. So we're not quite there, but I do think of that as him planting the seed of just because you don't see women doing the thing doesn't mean that you can't do it when you grow up. And so I think of that as kind of like my starting point, even though I didn't really get excited about science until after he passed away. But I do think of that as like you can do this.
How old were you then?
I think when I asked him that question, I must have been like 4. That's
wow.
Like that's one of my earliest memories.
Right. But see, that's one of your earliest memories, and he was opening you up and encouraging you at that point. That's amazing.
Yes,
that's amazing.
Exactly.
Wow. All right. So that's fantastic. That's a formative memory. So when did you find yourself like getting into like, I guess, math and science?
You know, the thing is, I never thought of myself as a math. I mean, I guess this is still, I was fairly young. I didn't like, it wasn't something where I was like, I've been obsessed with numbers since I can remember. It is true that I loved the Count on Sesame Street. The Count and Oscar were my two, but I loved the Bats. I loved
Right,
hanging
right.
with them. And when I got into first grade, there was a girl in our class who was a year younger than us. She had skipped kindergarten and she knew how to do something called times tables, and I didn't know how to do that. And I went home and demanded to my dad, "You have to teach me this immediately." I was just like, not knowing it wasn't even that like I wanted to be better than her. I just wanted to like keep up with like whatever was at the top. And I love doing my times tables. I think that that was like my first. I found it comforting. I stayed after school a lot to get picked up, and I would just sit there and write the times tables out over and over again, which
Oh
is like,
wow.
in hindsight, like very neurodivergent behavior, but like it was
No, but
very
that's
comforting.
great.
Yeah.
That's great. Right. That's great. I mean, for me, it was like imagination. It was like I
Mm.
remember like the first time my mom put like a pop-up book in my hands. And when I finished it, I was like, well, why is it over? And so I started like imagining other things in the book. So for you, I guess it was that. Is that fair to say? It was just like you just something else to go forward with.
Yeah, I think I showed an early love of numbers. My mom's mother, I spent time with her in Brooklyn, and she was a teacher. And my grandma would often tutor kids from the block after school and that kind of thing. And so I was like doing long division with her, like and helping her like explain things to the kids. And so I was really into the stuff. And at some point when I was 10, one of my teachers said to my mom, she needs more enrichment and she seems to really like the science stuff. And so my mom read in the newspaper, this is 1993, right? She read in the newspaper that there was one theater on the west side of LA that was showing a documentary about Stephen Hawking called A Brief History of Time. And so she was like, we're going to a Saturday matinee for this because that was all we could afford. She was already going to be having to spend gas money to get from the east side to the west side,
Right,
etc.
right.
And so she's like, we're doing this. And I'm like, I want to watch X-Men. Like, what are we doing here? Like, I I was so mad. I was like, why are we're going to some documentary. This is some adult stuff.
I want to
And
watch
halfway through
X-Men.
the yeah, I wanted to watch X-Men. And halfway through the documentary, Stephen Hawking is talking about like using math to solve problems that Albert Einstein hadn't figured out, and that this was like
Mm,
his job. And I was like, whoa, you can do math and get paid for it? This is like music to a nerdy working class kid's ears, right? Like,
yes, yes,
and
no, yes.
that was it. I walked out of the movie theater and I was like, you have to buy me the book. You have to buy me the book. You have to buy me the book. And my mom was like, I don't know, like, it's a book for adults. She didn't want me to get discouraged. And so my uncle Peter
Wait.
actually got me the book for my 11th birthday. Sent it to me from Brooklyn, actually.
Oh wow. And you have in the Edge of Space Time, you have a, a tribute to him. A
I
thank you to
do.
him.
He's
You
he's on a
do.
cruise right now, so he actually doesn't know about it yet. But the book
Oh,
is in
oh, good. I
the
won't say,
book is
won't
in
spoil it for
part
him.
dedicated to my Uncle Peter. No, he's on a cruise. He doesn't know. He's not on a Star
Okay.
Trek cruise, so it's like not the best possible cruise. But
Well, now, okay, so now, even more so now, when I read that, I was like, oh, well, of course, I know that, like, I put a tribute to my mom and when I did the Cisco autobiography, but now that even makes so much more weight to it, right? To put that. Okay, so you watch that, and then I guess you got the book. Was that for you said a birthday present? Was that right?
yeah, that was for my 11th birthday. And it's definitely he wrote that book for adults. So my mom was not wrong. Just to be clear, my mom was not wrong about like to worry that I would be discouraged because it might be too hard for me.
So it was a little. Would you find a little too much for you at the time, or
I don't think I actually finished the book until adulthood.
okay?
And in a way, it didn't matter because I found enough stuff in it that it kept me like I got really obsessed. There's like a chart or some discussion somewhere in there about the standard model of particle physics, which, as you know, I write quite a bit about in both of my books.
Right, right.
And I would just like sit there and was trying to memorize the names of all the particles. very count behavior, right? And then I was like trying to tell people about it on the school bus. Like there are these things called quirks. People were like, okay. Especially at that point, I went to a performing and visual arts magnet school. So like it was not a place for people who were like super nerdy science wise.
How did it make you feel that this like new world was opening up to you? But I mean, it doesn't sound like there were a lot of people that you could like express yourself with, like, in regards to friends and stuff that really understood what you were thinking and feeling at the time. How did that feel?
In a way, I think I was lucky because um when I was into the performing arts stuff I was doing at school. And
Right.
so I think for me in that sense, like it worked. I was at that point I was playing flute. I taught myself alto saxophone. I was playing saxophone in the jazz band. I was doing modern dance. I was doing jazz dance. I was doing ballet. So I had all of these other things going on. I was also at that point running super competitive track, like junior
Oh, okay.
Olympic level track. And so like I had all of these other things going on, but it is the case that in all of those spaces, it was usually like, okay, I never felt like bullied or not accepted, but it was always like, okay, she's different.
Mm,
And people just kind of accepted me as different. I think at that time I was watching The Next Generation, Star Trek The Next Generation on television, and I was really identifying a lot with Data. Like at one point I tried to convince everyone to call me like Brenda Spiner, like after Brent Spiner. But I was really like I identified with Data in the sense that like I really like Data's commitment to being very logical, but I also think maybe I identified with Data's curiosity about how everyone else operated because it was clear that like I was operating differently from them.
that was actually my next question, because it started to sound like Star Trek had an impact around this time with you. Is that the case? And was it Next Gen?
Next Gen was definitely the first one that I saw on television. I actually saw Star Trek for The Voyage Home in the theater. Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, I was a
Wow.
toddler because I was four. There were a lot of, I guess four is when I started to like record things, right?
Great,
Um,
great.
but that was actually my first trek was seeing Star Trek 4. And then TNG, I remember um my dad was mostly the non-custodial parent, but I remember when it premiered that I was with him and he was like, we're going to sit down and watch this show. And especially those first two episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation are pretty heavy.
Hmm.
And definitely the political stuff, a lot of it would have gone over my head. It is also the case that my parents are both political activists, my stepmother too. And so, like, the themes were not totally foreign to me. But that was like my first, like, okay, we've got people flying through space. I'm seeing Geordie LaForge, so I'm seeing this black scientist on the ship. And I know LeVar Burton tells the story, as Kate Mulgrew tells the story about how many women in science come up to her, that LeVar Burton hears all these stories about black scientists who are like,
Right.
you were my first scientist, but he was my first black scientist on television.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. I remember like watching Next Gen and seeing Jordy, and it was like, wow, and I think, if I'm being really honest, Jordy didn't really resonate with me until they moved him to engineering.
Mm.
And then I was like, oh yeah, it made a lot of
Hmm.
sense. And he felt like, I was like, oh yeah, I can really identify with this individual. And you mentioned your parents, and I will say, doing research for tonight and for interviewing you, I found out about your mom, Margaret Prescott. And I was like reading about her for like 45 minutes an hour. I was like, oh my God, this woman is incredible.
Yeah.
You have an incredible mom as she's an activist, and she's just a force of nature in her own right. And I just wanted
Yes.
to ask you, how has that impacted you as well?
I think one of the reasons that I've been able to persist in the ways that I have, being a barrier breaker in the ways that I have been, is partly because I watched my mom be so unrelenting. when I was a kid. I just watched there are all kinds of like I think you can find footage of this online of her like taking the microphone away from the chief of the Los Angeles Police Department
Yes.
because she didn't like what he was saying. I'm pretty sure she just went and grabbed the mic. Um she's that kind of person, right? And so obviously there can be things that are difficult about being a movement baby because you don't get the same kind of protection from what is the outside world like, what is broken about the outside world when you're growing up on picket lines and going to protests.
Right.
And I think it's always difficult for Black children. It's always difficult for working class and poor children to kind of be insulated from that in the first place. And then you add on that your parents are actually the helpers who rush in. And so you're seeing even more of the problems. And so I do think that there is some difficulty around that. It is also the case that my fresh year of college, like halfway through, I called my mom and I was like, I'm dropping physics. I'm switching to anthropology because I had this idea that it was easier. I think I would see it differently now. So sorry to any anthropologists, but that's how I was thinking about it at the time. And my mom, total Caribbean parent style. I didn't clock it as Caribbean at the time, but she's from Barbados. She was like, I did not work a second job in the evenings so that you could go to Harvard and quit on your dreams in the first semester. And I was like, oh, okay. I will not be switching majors. Mom has so declared. And I'm really, I wouldn't be here if she hadn't just like and it was actually pretty rare for anybody in my family to sit me down and say, like, you have to do this thing. And that was one of those moments where my moments, I mean, I guess it was a moment
A moment,
where
yeah.
she understood, actually, I do need to put my foot down and tell her she has to try.
Yeah, yeah, I understand that because my mom gave me a wide berth, but there were moments in my life where she was like, "No, no, you're gonna do this thing. You want to
Mhm.
write, right? Don't listen to other people tell you if they tell you can or can't do it. Do what you know." And she would take me like I remember my first grade teacher wasn't getting paid, and like in my school and home they weren't necessarily striking, but they were doing something about that. And so my mom took me to find out about it. And we
Mm.
went there, and I was, and I was like, "Oh, they're not getting paid." And I was like, "What, 6 or 7?" But she took me to learn about that and to understand those things. So, I think when parents do that in the formative years, it helps inform the adults that we become. Right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think my mom is, I guess, like a second generation teacher. Her siblings are both teachers. Her parents were both teachers.
Yeah.
And so I think I also benefited a lot from the fact that my mom taught in the Sikh program at Queens College.
Wow.
And so she had done adult literacy work. She was also part of the teacher organizing in Ocean Hill, Brownsville in the early 70s and part of the Black Panther breakfast program. She was one of the volunteers there. And so I benefited a lot also from my mom's big picture view of the importance of education and also the barriers that people face in education. And I think that she was very, I think under normal circumstances, I would say aggressive, but I think for obvious reasons, I want to say she was fearless in
Mm.
pursuing these are resources my daughter needs, including taking me to that documentary to go see A Brief History of Time, knowing I was going to whine about it, knowing she was going to have to listen to me whine about it, even though the whole thing was costing her money. And I guess I will say the other thing is that, I often tell this story by saying that like my mom was doing it for enrichment for me, but my mom is a fashion maven. She was always the best dressed person at the protest. She does less protesting now because she's older, but she continues, I think, to still be the best dressed person. I mean, she was
That's
very
great.
fashion forward, and that was true even with I remember at one point in high school, she was like, "Do you know about these neutrino particles? I think neutrinos are very interesting." And I was like, I none of the stuff I was reading was about neutrinos. I was like, my mom doesn't know what she's talking about. And my mom is in fact right that neutrinos are some of the most boss particles out there. And so I had to like admit to my mom, I think I write about this in the Disordered Cosmos at the end, that like she understood that what was up with neutrinos before I did.
Wow.
And so I
Yeah.
think she was also genuinely interested, and my mom's curiosity was helpful to me to witness that curiosity.
Yeah. Yeah. That curiosity from parents is infectious, I think. to the children. I know my mom's has been an infectious in me. So all right, so you read the you watched the documentary, you got the book, but what started you, like, after that? Did you really start on that trajectory to say, oh, I want to be a cosmologist, I want to be a scientist, I want to be a physicist? Is that how that happened?
I am that kind of person, very type A, very directed, and because of my mom's organizing, her organization was one of the first ones to really realize that the internet was a powerful organizing tool. And so they were using email and CompuServe back when it was still DOS, like before Windows. So I knew my way around computers and the internet. And so this is also all happening around the same time that the World Wide Web goes live, right?
Right, it's emerging.
And so one of the first things that I did when I got access to the web is I looked up the Cambridge University website and I found Stephen Hawking's email address.
Wow.
And I emailed Stephen Hawking and said, I want to be a theoretical physicist like you. What do I need to do? This is I'm 11 years old at this point. And he had a graduate student who wrote back, which in hindsight, graduate students aren't supposed to be doing that. I'm a professor now. I mean, hopefully that person was getting paid for the email component, but your grad students are supposed to be calculating. The grad student emailed me back and was like, you have to go to a top university and then you go to a PhD program and then you become a fellow or a professor at a university. And so then I was like, okay, I looked up how to do this. I figured out that going to college costs money. I figured out which schools had good financial aid. I figured out that Harvard and Caltech gave good financial aid. And then I was like, I have to go to Harvard or Caltech. And I had the whole thing worked out by the time I was 12.
Wow. So wow. So at 12, you decided the trajectory of your career and your life.
Yeah. I mean, I think, obviously I was a child, right? And so there were many things about that I didn't. I think being a child of the 90s, like being an elder millennial, I was just in kind of that environment of multiculturalism, and particularly growing up in Los Angeles and going to magnet schools, which in LA, these are not test-in schools. These are federally mandated integrated schools. So the population distribution is designed to be very mixed and very integrated. So I was growing up in this environment where that was very idyllic compared to really the outside society that we were in. And so I really had this idea, I understood that there were not, I don't think I had any sense of numbers. I knew there were not a lot of Black people in physics. I knew there were not a lot of women in physics. I had never heard of a Black woman in physics. And when I was born in 82, Black women had only been earning PhDs in physics for 10 years. So it's not, we were really only 20 years in. And I think at that point, there were really only 15 or 20. It was not a large number. But my sense was oh, I will just look different than other people in the classroom. That was my only sense of how race and gender might come into play. And I thought maybe I would have to deal with some stupid jokes, but I did not. So we'll say I had a whole plan, but I didn't have a plan that allowed me to adjust and account for what the real world was actually like.
Yes, I understand. For that component, it's the same thing with me with writing. I had a plan. I wanted to be a writer and do this and do that, but the real world component didn't figure in. I was a kid, so I was like,
yes,
but that doesn't take away from your drive and determination and everything that you focused on for your trajectory, and of course everything that you accomplished is absolutely incredible.
Thank you.
Absolutely is beyond incredible. I think you are, correct me if I'm wrong here, but you are one of the few Black women to have a PhD as a physicist. Is that correct?
Yeah. So when I earned my PhD, when I defended my PhD in 2010, I was among Black women who had earned PhDs from departments of physics or physics and astronomy. I was somewhere in the 50s, 60s. So I was one of the first 100 Black women to earn a PhD in physics.
Wow.
And, often this is talked about as a big accomplishment, and it is a big, like, getting a PhD in any subject is an accomplishment, right? So I don't want to downplay it, but I think it's really an indictment of our society. To situate in context what that number means, in the United States, 2,000 PhDs are granted every single year in physics. Half of them go to US citizens. And in the last 53 years or so, only about 120 of them have gone to Black women in the United States or in Canada, so North America overall. So it's an extraordinarily small number, and it's really an indictment of our society that the numbers are so small and that so many of us are still barrier breakers. And like, I was the first one in theoretical cosmology. I shouldn't have been the first, not in 2010, right?
No, you shouldn't have been, not in 2010. And I can, in a very small way, I should say, I can relate in the sense that I believe 6% of writers in America are Black, and I believe 1% are doing science fiction. And of that 1%, I know I'm the only one that has done a Star Trek novel in about 20 years.
The fans are very aware of this. I mean, this is one of the reasons that the work that you've been doing is so important.
As your work as well.
Yeah, thank you. But the fans are very aware of that dearth of opportunity for Black science fiction writers. I think the other thing I will say is SFF, speculative fiction, as people sometimes call it.
Yes.
We're seeing a lot more emerging of Black fantasy writers, but what you might call traditional, air quotes, science fiction is still, we're not seeing that same kind of emergence of Black writers and support for Black writers in the publishing industry. So I do think the work that you've been doing stands out for that reason by itself.
Thank you. Okay, enough about me. Thank you. That's so sweet.
I could keep going.
No. That's not why we're here. So I want to ask, what was it like? You're now going to Harvard, right? And what was the Harvard experience like for you?
I guess I will say, if there's any silver lining to the Epstein files coming out,
oh, okay,
it is that for the first time, I think the public is getting some genuine insight into how institutions like that function.
Yes.
It really is almost like another planet, especially like I got
Yes.
there and people wore to class like clothing that I was like, I thought we only wore that when you're going somewhere really nice and you have one of those. But that was like, I had no concept of having that kind of money. Like, I dated someone my frosh year who had a BlackBerry, and mind you, this is like fall of 1999. This is one of the first BlackBerries ever made, right? Like people, cell phones are giant bricks at that point.
Right. Huge, right. Sure.
And this was just like, yeah. So it was like that. I had never seen that kind of wealth and snobbery. It was like really beyond anything in my imagination. And I actually still find it really difficult to describe to people who haven't been around something like that. And people will say like, oh yeah, but I've been to MIT or I've been over to Caltech. And I'm like, no, I was a postdoctoral fellow at MIT and it is still not the same thing. Because Harvard is really an institution that is designed to produce people who will run the world. That is how it understands itself internally. And that is how they understand themselves when they're doing admissions. And this is also why you see all these faculties seeking out these really powerful connections and positions. So you can imagine a kid who's just like, let's all just go be nerdy together, walking into this environment where there are all of these like social dynamics. And this is like, if you took data and put them in the mirrorverse, almost, I don't want to say everybody at Harvard was evil, but like disorienting.
But it's oddly very much like that with Data and Star Trek, because and Star Trek speaks to that a lot, because especially with Data, where he would not get a lot of the social cues, And what I really loved about Data is that there were times when people would try to insult him,
Mm-hmm.
and he'd be like, "What? What do you, you know, you know?" And they would think he would get it because they were like, "Oh, don't you get my social cue? I'm trying to just call you Data. You're just a machine. You're just." He's like, "No, it's my name. What do you, you know?" And I think what you're speaking to is that there is this hierarchy and this class system, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and I've had glimpses into that, you know, on a personal level where they expect everyone to just adhere and
Yes.
obey and
Mm-hmm.
listen. And I was
Yes.
never raised like that. As you know, like you, I was never raised like that. I'm gonna shoot from the hip and I'm gonna speak my mind. And when you do that, it's like, what? Why are you not obeying and to those social cues and listening to those things? So I can definitely relate in some small way to what you're speaking about. You know, maybe one day we won't have any of that. Maybe it'll be more of a Star Trek
Yes. Yes.
system than the capitalist system that we
Yes.
have.
I think it was, you know, I was there, I was a Pell Grant student and I was a federal work study student. And they definitely they didn't let us forget that. Every semester, I was asked to write a thank you note to the anonymous donors who were paying most of my tuition. The financial aid office, it made them nuts because I refused to do it. And I was like, they will just have to be happy being rich. They're not getting a thank you note from the little black kid that they helped out because they have
I love
money.
that.
They
I
can buy
love that.
themselves like a little cottage if it feels bad. Like that was really my
Right.
attitude about it. But it was totally one of those things that like I did not understand the rules. Like at some point I heard that one of my friends came from like big money. And so I was just like, I was curious. I was like, how much are you worth? And he was like, you're not supposed to ask that question. I was like, I didn't know you're not supposed to. Like, because I've never been around anybody who was worth something enough for me to ask to even think of.
Right. Right. Right.
Right.
Right.
But
Right.
there were all these unwritten rules and very much they were like, we want you to think outside the box. But the box was like very clearly be grateful that you're here,
Yeah.
understand that you were chosen to run the world, and don't ask any questions. So I was very involved in student labor organizing, and they were constantly like, why can't you guys just be happy that you're here? Why do you need to ask how much the janitors are getting paid?
Right. Think
Why do you need
outside the
to?
box. Right. But they need the
Right.
box.
Right. Exactly.
Right. Without the
Exactly.
box, they have nothing because the box is what perpetuates their system. So
Exactly. And we had these, like, we were getting these amazing meals. We got 3 hot meals a day. I was actually pretty outraged when they got rid of hot breakfast, which I guess says maybe I got used to the. This happened like a couple years ago, so it didn't happen while I was there. And then they were paying the dining hall staff like crap.
oh
And
wow.
there were so many students who were just like very unconcerned. And I was like, these are the people who make sure that we have the nutrition and can go get our homework done. They like I walk up to the grill, they know how I like my burger. They
Wow.
remember us, they take care of us.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
there was this like the sense of like, oh, but if they want to make better money, then they should be better trained. And some of these people were like, I was an engineer in Brazil, but I can't have that job in the United States, that kind of thing.
Right.
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 There were, and a lot of them were Black. A lot of them were Haitian immigrants, Cape Verdean immigrants. And so there was a lot of, I think, also being from a Caribbean family and realizing that most of the Caribbean people on campus were there to serve me and not people who went to school with me.
Wow. 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 And so you went to Harvard for 4 years. Yeah.
Yeah, I was there for 4 years.
After that, what did you do after that?
I went straight to graduate school, which for me was the right choice. I always feel like it's important to say that I don't necessarily think people should feel like the perfect trajectory requires them not to take any time off. But I didn't have a job that I wanted to work. I didn't have a family that was going to give me food in exchange for nothing. And I didn't want to go home to East LA and like try and get a job in a taqueria or McDonald's or something. And it felt like that was going to be what my options were. And I knew I wanted a PhD. So I went right into graduate school. I started a PhD program in astronomy,
Wow.
which is actually not where I finished my PhD, but that's where I started. And I stayed through my master's degree. I passed my exams and then realized I wanted to do theoretical physics and transferred to a physics program.
That's a mouthful. That's a lot. So, so what is the life or what is the day of a theoretical physicist like? What's the average day of a theoretical physicist like?
This is always such a tough question because the thing that I want to tell people is like we do these calculations and they're so amazing, but actually like a lot of it is like responding to emails. I think part of it, especially at this point, like now I'm a tenured professor. And so a lot of my job is actually facilitating other people's research. Like I have an early
Mm-hmm.
career researcher that I employ. I have a postdoc that works for me. And a lot of my job is making sure that he can do his job. I'm in the process of hiring another postdoc. So these are people who have their PhDs, but are kind of, it's like the equivalent of being a medical resident. They're kind of in the training phase after their PhD. And so a lot of my work is applying for grants to make sure that I have money to pay them and then dealing with the bureaucracy. And then the cool parts are like we've been working on this calculation. I had the idea to do the calculation. My postdoc has done a lot of the work on the calculation. And we've been drafting a paper, which mostly means he's been drafting a paper and I've been standing there being like, okay, are you doing this? We should change the order.
Right.
I need this calculation needs to be more clear. I'm checking the calculations, that kind of thing. And it is pretty cool to have a project go from there's nothing there to we now have a 25-page document that's full of equations doing a calculation that hasn't been done before.
That is
And
no, that is pretty cool. I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I mean, I haven't been able to do like the calculations are mostly his work and you know to be clear to people about how the power dynamics work there, I think the appropriate thing is one, I always say, like a lot of this is his work. When I go and give talks, I say, this is my postdoc, invite him to give a talk, hire him for a faculty position. And also when I'm writing letters of recommendation, I'm saying things like this project, he contributed the following things. But it is an idea that I was the one who had the idea. We should do this calculation. We should explore this part of dark matter parameter space and understand this thing. And so even when I'm not actually getting to do the calculations myself, there is still something really beautiful about seeing an idea that you had in your head actually unfold on the
Mm-hmm.
page.
Mm-hmm.
And it's months before you see it laid out nicely. And so we're in the process of laying it out, trying to get it out before my book tour starts. And it's just so cool to see it all come together.
So I want to get to the book tour. I want to get to a lot of things, but really quick, really first, the chat is talking about your dress. So let's talk about the fact.
Should I stand up? Should I like?
Yes, this is fantastic. You went and before about an hour or so before showtime, you posted that you were going to wear this. So thank you so much for wearing that. It's so great. It's so great. It's such in the spirit of everything in Star Trek. So let me ask, in regards to dark matter, is that like your speciality or is it one of your specialities?
Yeah, you know, the funny thing about dark matter is that it was not something I planned to work on. And it was something that I kind of fell into when I was a postdoctoral fellow myself at MIT and was in the middle of switching research groups and needed something to work on. And someone was like, have you read this paper? I don't know what I think about this paper. And I had been working on something relating to it. So we sat down and read the paper and we were like, we don't know if we agree with the results. So this is a common thing to read papers, you read them critically. This is part of the scientific work. And this was like a published, it had gone through peer review, but that doesn't mean everybody agrees. And we tried to reproduce the calculation and the claims that this paper was making and decided that we thought it was wrong. So this was me and another postdoc. And this was just like, we just kind of fell into working on this calculation. And the next thing you know, we have a paper. We go to our postdoc advisor, who is very well known, extraordinary, lovely. I have so many adjectives for Alan Guth. We go to him and we're like, we have this calculation. What do you think? And he's like, okay, tweak this, tweak that. And we were like, Alan, do you think that you would like to publish this with us because your name being on the paper will help? And he was like, yes, actually, I think that this is good. And to this day, this is my most highly cited paper. This is my most famous paper. And it was the one that kind of put me on the map. And so at the time I was just kind of like, we fell into it. I don't know if this is like my passion or whatever, but the findings that we had in that paper were related to something called axion dark matter. So this is a proposed hypothetical particle. We don't know if it exists. If it does exist, it would be a good dark matter candidate. And there were questions that were lingering after the paper, and they just stayed with me. And that's what you want, is you want questions that stay with you, because they're going to annoy you at some point. So it better be like a good one that you're excited about in some fundamental way, because at some point you're going to be pissed and not want to do it anymore.
So are you still trying to find that?
So axion dark matter is still at the center of my research, and I've I guess I've supervised 3 PhD students now to completion, and
Wow.
2 of them were on axion dark matter, and that's also the project I'm working on right now involves axions, so it is something that I continue to pursue. Yeah.
And it's not really dark matter, is that right?
No, because I guess like my association, and I talk about this in the Disordered Cosmos, right, is that like
Right.
within the Black community, dark takes on very particular like flavor for people. And we think of this very much in terms of color. And so I think that's for me what dark matter evokes, is that there's color involved, and something that's literally dark in the sense of color. But what we call dark matter is actually almost certainly invisible. So light goes through it, light doesn't interact with it. And so I think actually a better term for it would be invisible matter, although there is like
Mhm,
some
mhm.
small possibility that it's comprised of like small black holes, in which case dark matter might actually be appropriate because black holes absorb light.
Okay, okay. So what I want to say to the audience, whether you're watching or listening, I want to talk about your 2 books. And the first is The Disordered Cosmos, which came out about what, a year and a half ago now? Is that
No,
right?
5 years ago. It actually just turned 5 last week.
Are
Yeah.
you kidding? Wow,
Time
that's nuts.
dilation, man. Time
Time
dilation.
dilation for real. That's crazy. Okay. So I've read this book. This book is fantastic.
Thank you.
And absolutely. And what I want to say about both of these books, uh, first of all, the writing is very accessible. As a writer, I've read lots of books on science and cosmology, and sometimes, and I've even read papers. Sometimes they're a little tough to get through, but
Mm.
your work is very accessible, and I think there's 2 reasons that your work is very accessible. And one of the reasons is that you use great cultural examples, and you use a lot of Black culture examples, which is fantastic. And you use a lot of Star Trek,
Hmm.
which I think is fantastic. And you use that in the second book, The Edge of Space Time, a lot. But before I get to that, I want to ask you about this cover for The Disordered Cosmos. And for those that can't see it, it's a cover of like the silhouette almost of like a Black child, and in that silhouette is like a galaxy. How did that? Right. How did you come
Yeah.
up with that? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, cover design with books is always an interesting thing. And in this particular case, they had sent a couple of covers, and the cover designer, whose name is escaping me, I think it's Pete Condreo, he had done a couple of books for people who do astrophysics. And so the designs he sent were kind of in line with that. And I was like, I know that my book is different, and I want that to come off the cover, that this is
Mm,
a different book. And I also was very intent on having a book that when Black readers saw it, they might see themselves in the cover.
yes.
And there were a couple things there, which is one, the visual, but also the subtitle is A Journey into Dark Matter, Space Time, and Dreams Deferred. And I'm a huge Langston Hughes fan. You might have noticed that I
Yes.
referenced the same Langston Hughes poem in the subtitles of both books.
Yes.
Dream Boogie, right?
Yes. 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 That's what we'll
And
get to. Yes.
I wanted Black people to feel seen and heard by their just experience with the cover. And so actually my best friend, Sharifa, who also drew a lot of the figures for both books, she and I at some point like went through Pinterest, and we were just like looking for concepts, and we were seeing a bunch of stuff that looked like this. which in hindsight was very inspired by like Lorna Simpson's artwork. So Lorna Simpson
Mm,
is a photographer, collage artist, painter, and also I hadn't fully appreciated this, also sculptor. I saw her
yeah.
her exhibit at the Met a few months ago, and I was like, wait a minute, there's a sculpture that looks like my grandmother's living room. We can have a whole conversation about the New York, Brooklyn Black grandma. It was amazing.
Oh, right.
Um, so I just sent that and was like, "Can we do this?" And Pete came back with that cover,
That's
and we
awesome.
rolled with it. But I really appreciate that my publisher let me have input and that the designer heard the ask and went with it.
Absolutely. It's an amazing cover. The book is amazing. I suggest everyone pick it up. Um, what I love about it is that I feel like it's written for everyone, but it's also at the same time written for persons of color. You know, it's also speaking to us. You know, and that's a beautiful thing. I don't think I've ever read a cosmology book or a science book that was specifically speaking to me as a
Mm.
black person. You know, as a person of color, and that had me in mind. You know, and knowing you, I can hear your voice, you know, and you have a very distinctive and poetic and very smooth voice, and very smooth prose. And it's just a wonderful book. So I suggest everyone to pick it up. Now, for the edge of space time, I want to do the same thing. I want to start with the cover. This cover is fascinating. I find this cover fascinating. I've seen you wear earrings that
Yes.
represent this cover. Can you please talk a little bit about the cover as well?
Yeah, so I will say I actually for the main cover design, the artwork in the center, I actually had nothing to do with this. I just picked
Okay.
it. They sent me
Oh, okay.
5 designs. They sent me 5 designs, and I was like, "That one, hands down." I sent it to my brain trust, in particular, 2 of my besties, Desi and Lean. Some of you in the chat might know one or both of them. Desi was just on the cruise with some of y'all that I'm jealous of. She also gave me these Protect Black Women earrings that
Nice.
I'm wearing. Um, and Lean is a designer. She's an incredible designer. She's an incredible artist. And so I went to them and I was like, what do you all think? And they were like, yeah, we affirm this one. So a lot of it was like going to my brain trust and being like, you know, how does this look? And I will say I did get involved. I made them a little bit nuts because I spent a lot of time on making sure that things were lined up. Um,
Oh, absolutely. Right. Right.
Partly because,
The-
like, the book concerns itself with symmetry, and I actually, I don't know if you've gotten to this part of the book, but I write the cover into the book. I actually don't know if it's in this arc. People should know, by the way, that the arc is like always an out-of-date version of the book. Derek knows this. I don't know if other people don't necessarily know this. But I wrote the cover into as like an example of how we think about something called boundary conditions, which there's a whole chapter about boundary conditions, which sounds very dry, but I promise you the chapter's fun. I talk about cricket, I talk about baseball. Um, and I spent a lot of time, my poor editor, just talking to her about like the alignment of the F and the E and the separation and making sure it was offset from this line. So I did
this
involve myself.
this book is a lot of things. Dry is not one of them. I really want to have a discussion with you about this book. I'm gonna do one little thing here. Um, there's just so much in it that's just amazing. The title is The Edge of Space Time: Particles, Poetry, and the Cosmic Dream Boogie. And there's a line you have here. It says, The edge of space time is about the ways in which our relationship to the cosmos can be part of our boogie woogie rumble, our challenge to a dream deferred.
Mm.
And I think that's so poignant. Can you speak to that a little bit, please?
So that particular section comes after I quote the Langston Hughes poem that I reference in both of the
Yes.
subtitles of the books. And I think a lot in Langston Hughes' lines. I think that he was one of the early poets that I connected with as a child. His first poem that I ever read was Miss Blues's Child. I must have read that when I was like 7 or 8. And it was like a poem about a child. And actually, when I read it, I was feeling sad. And so I was like, this is a poem that speaks to me and my experience. And so I really wanted to kind of help people understand this is why this poem keeps coming back in my work. And also, this is what he means. Good morning, Daddy. Ain't you heard the boogie woogie rumble of a dream deferred? It's joyous and sad at the same time. And he's really in those lines trying to manifest the feeling of the blues, but doing it on the page with no backing instruments. And it's just the reader and the words on the page connecting with it. And what I wanted to say with that moment was when you understand something about physics, even if you never do any calculations, even if you don't understand calculus and geometry scares you, when you know something about physics, you can have this boogie woogie feeling about it. Even in the worst moments, the boogie woogie rumble of a dream. Yes, deferred, but the boogie woogie rumble of a dream. And that was what I wanted to communicate with this book.
Absolutely. I don't know if I've read it now or read it in one of your books or watched it in an interview, but you said physics is for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And it really resonated with me, because in this world, in this life, there seems to be almost like a gatekeeper or gatekeepers for anything that's important, anything that's about higher learning or about speciality or anything that will enlighten, and physics is for all of us. Physics is what we're made of. We are literally
Yes.
our stuff. I often, there were times that I'll have a sad moment or I'll have a down moment. I'll be like, why am I worrying about, or why am I thinking about things that are happening in my life or things that are happening, here? And I'll think, right now there's a storm churning on Jupiter, and it, to take myself out of the mundane of what's happening here, if that makes any sense, And
Yes.
I think we need to realize that, we are so powerful and not get caught up in those boxes that people try to, put us in.
I think that's exactly the thing that I want people to feel and recognize. And I do feel that to the extent that Black people, and more broadly, people of color, people from marginalized backgrounds, our trans kin in particular who are under attack right now, our Palestinian kin who are under attack right now, that often people don't feel welcomed into the universe because they don't have access to a dark night sky. They're in urban environments that are heavily light polluted. I grew up in smoggy Los Angeles. I know the folks who are part of the Gaza Astronomy Club used to have to be very careful about when they took their telescopes out on the roof because there was always risk that IDF would think that they were weapons
Wow.
and attack them for that.
Right.
And so there are all these people who really have to kind of struggle with or don't feel safe being out with the night sky. It's also quite dangerous in some places for Black people to be in the middle of nowhere. Like I wouldn't
Yes.
necessarily recommend northern New Hampshire hiking to anybody.
Right.
Which, and I say that I live in New Hampshire, there are a lot of things I love about it, but there's work that needs to be done here. And so I think one of the powers that comes with books is that you get to choose where you sit down and read that book.
Yes.
You get to choose what relationship you will have with the idea that's being presented to you. You get to decide afterwards, okay, I'm going to go look up images from the JWST, the telescopes, Hubble, Rubin Observatory, all these things. And so I think in part, my goal is to say to people, you get to choose your personal relationship and no longer have it mediated for you in the ways that they are, and in the ways that I think white children, children of good means, etc., are more welcomed into that curiosity and exploration and told this universe is for you, that we actually have to work harder to make sure that everybody has that feeling about it. and that we work to get the resources into their hands, which is why, like, books are getting expensive. I'm sure you've been paying attention to this, like the price of paper is going through the roof,
Absolutely.
right? And so, like,
Absolutely.
I also want to encourage people, if you can't afford the book, please go to your library, support your library by asking them to order it, and then borrow it from your library, because books get a much longer life when they live in libraries, right? And
Absolutely.
that's part of creating resources for our communities, is supporting the libraries, getting these books into the libraries and using them.
Absolutely. And I should also mention, because I said that your two books do two things. One is that your writing is very relatable. The second beautiful thing that I know that your work does is that you set history straight in both books. And what I mean when I say that is that you give details uh, about events, or about moments in history, and who should be acknowledged for those moments or findings in history, and um, whereas they may have been whitewashed, who or what organizations, or what am I'm drawing a blank. What civilizations really founded certain things, or for example, individuals in science, what men in science, some of the things that they've done that has been overlooked, which may have made them not look that great, and it's been overlooked, or women in science, some of their accomplishments that have
Mm-hmm.
just been whitewashed. And what you do is you say, hey, this is what actually happened. This is the reality of what happened. And I think that's a wonderful thing, a beautiful thing, a truthful thing, because I think often in society, what we do is we often accept the beautiful lie instead of the ugly truth.
Mm-hmm. I think that there are multiple pieces to this. I will say, with the edge of space-time, one of the holes that I went deep into, and for like 2 weeks, it was all I would talk to anyone about. I'm sure I was like making people nuts. Was that I read one of Newton's laws was actually first written down by some Zhao Kingdom philosophers, like many centuries before like Newton was even a figment of someone's imagination, right?
Right.
And so I spent a bunch of time tracking this down, finding translations. Like, this is before Imperial China was kind of coalesced into um, a kingdom. So that's why I say Zhao Kingdom. This like predates China as a concept. And I spent all this time reading the translations, reading the debate about the differences in the characters and what the words meant and the use of space and time. And I am so part of it was like, I just had so much fun with that I was putting it on the page because I was excited about this thing that I had learned, and I wanted to share with everybody else this thing that I had learned. But I also wanted to kind of, as much as was within my ability with the things that I know, which is what I know about history is very incomplete, global history in particular. I wanted to present to people the idea that there is a global sense of, we should ask the question of, how does this community think about space? How does this community think about time? And actually, what we find over and over again is that communities often have merged concepts of space time and space
Yes.
and time coming together in ways that I think can be intellectually productive for what we would consider technical or professional science. I think there's always kind of the situating of, you're either doing real science or it's mystical, spiritual stuff, which I think can, one, be really disrespectful to
Right.
people's cultural context, but also I think is really missing an opportunity to see how these other modes of thought can invigorate and illuminate the concepts that we are struggling to understand for ourselves within science. And so I think that was kind of what I was trying to address. And I was also trying to address, partly to come back to one of your earlier questions about the book. Right now, a lot of times people are motivated to fund what we do in physics because they think it has some commercial value or some value to weapons building. And so part of what I wanted to do with this book was make a case for physics that is driven by sanctifying life. And I don't mean that in like the anti-abortion sense. I mean that in the Jewish sense. I come on my father's side from a Jewish
Mm,
family. I'm a member of 2 different synagogues. I keep the Tanakh in my office. So I'm like, I'm a serious, I relate to the Torah. And I wanted to say, what if we do physics in a way that says we believe in people and the spiritual power of physics for people? And that was
Right.
really a driving force. I wanted to make that case for in the book.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. I just think that for so long we've been in a system that doesn't do that, that it's hard now to pivot to something like that. And so I think your books and having individuals like you, scientists like you, saying, hey, we can do that and we can still make these discoveries, but we need to consider everyone. Everyone needs to be considered
Yes.
as we do these things. There's nothing wrong with that. And by opening up in a sense to everyone, you're you don't know who the next person is that's going to make the next discovery and find the next thing that will perhaps save us all.
I think that's exactly, I mean, that's my dream for this, is that we move into our Star Trek future.
Right.
Which is like, we understand that people like Elon Musk are only heroes to Lorcas from the Mirrorverse.
Right.
And right.
Right. I mean, it's hard to say, but it feels sometimes like we're in the Mirrorverse.
Yes, right. And I think, like, Gene Roddenberry worried about this. This is one of the reasons why, like, the history of the 21st century in 1990s Trek was written the way that it was, is it was meant to be like a warning shot of, I see the direction things are going in. And it wasn't just Gene, but I do think that was part of his vision. But there were a lot of people in the writer's room and working on the show who saw things and were putting things forward. And you even hear John Billingsley talk about this when he talks about the approach that Enterprise took to torture, and how this is something that he always feels like regret for, because they were working in the post 9/11 era and the securitization efforts and responding to that. And he feels like they didn't live up to the promise of Trek. And so I think, I know we could sit around talking about what are the things Trek got right, what are the ways that it handles race well, what are the ways it handles race and gender and all of these things badly. But I do think the one thing it always encourages us to think about is, how do we build human relationships that allow us to sustain humanity at its best? And that means communities where people are best taken care of, where we figure out how to turn our poop into food. I mean, we already do, because poop is fertilizer, right? Like, that's already like an option. But I really think that that's one of the reasons, like, I go to the Star Trek convention in Vegas every year. I saw people in the chat asking about that. I am in Vegas. If you bring your books to Vegas and you see me, I will sign them for you.
Yay. Yeah. I think Star Trek has always been a reflection of the time it's made in, and that's been both positive and sometimes negative. And that's just that's just a fact, because there are human beings that are writers writing that show, and they're always trying to put a positive and forward thinking face to it. But I think there's just human people writing it, so I think you're going to get both faces and both sides of a coin, when they're doing that. But for the most part, I think Star Trek it tries to at least show us the better sides of ourselves for the most part.
I agree. And I also, I just want to shout out the writer's room for Starfleet Academy.
Yes,
I will try not to say any spoilers, because I know people are still working through it or waiting for different ways to get their hands on it. There might be some international people who haven't seen it yet. But I just want to say that they have gone, like, balls out. I guess that's like what I want to say. They don't know if they're going to get more than 2 seasons, but they are going to do all of the things to say all the things that people need to hear, to say, stay alive, stay with us. We're in the fight. The community is with you. And I just love them for that. I love seeing Tawny Newsome move into this new role as not just in front of the camera, but behind the camera, and doing a little bit of both. That was an amazing episode, by the way.
That was an amazing episode. I've said before, I'll say it here, that the show has a lot of heart, and it really does. And it is showing us Star Trek in a different way. And that's what Star Trek is supposed to do. It is supposed to be different for every generation. And
Yes.
we all have a generation of Star Trek that we love and we want to hold on to. But at the same time, while we're holding on, don't hold on so tightly that you can't embrace something new.
Yes.
You
I mean,
know?
I will also say, like, I talked earlier about growing up and loving Data. And
Right.
also Brent Spiner, the first time I went to a Star Trek convention, he was the first one that I was like, I have to go meet Brent Spiner. That was like my but seeing Sam and seeing Carice Brooks in this role as Sam, it's like my inner child is like I get to see a character that I completely identify with. Like that
Yes.
scene in the first episode where she says, "I hear you," which
I
is like
hear you.
the delivery, it's hilarious, but also I'm like, I feel heard, I feel seen, like I feel the whole thing. And to see it in
Yes,
someone
yes.
who's embodied like a family member, I just like I have to say, I know a lot of people had some skepticism. I personally was like, this show is clearly going to be extremely queer. I feel that I was right. Everybody who else was wrong. Like everybody who didn't see that coming was wrong. Um,
I I was at a
I love it.
premiere. I was at a premiere, and I was fortunate enough to meet some of the cast, and they're so young. They're so young, and I said to them, it's so funny. I said to them, I said, there are kids that are going to be looking up to you guys, and they looked at me like, what? But
Yes.
there are kids that are going to be looking up to them, and that's part of what Star Trek does. It
Mhm.
takes kids, and just like you have a her dress on, and there is somebody that's going to be wearing something from Sam or Caleb,
Yes.
and that's Star Trek.
Mhm.
That's what Star Trek. I mean, it's also a television show. It's also a business, but it's also this function that it does for all of us and for our community and for humanity. You know, and that's why we need Star Trek. But that's also why we need people like you. Because
Thank you.
Star Trek is the fiction, but you are the reality. And so we need both of these things working in tandem together. So I really want to thank you for the hour and a little bit over that you've given us here tonight, because it's been an incredible time speaking with you.
Thank you so much for having me. And I just want to say for the Star Trek fans, there is a chapter, "You Are Not Safe in Science," at the end of The Edge of Space-Time. That is for us. And particularly, it's for Black Star Trek fans and anybody who has loved the Black characters. So I hope even if you don't read the rest of the book, you should, but even if you don't, please pick it up and read that chapter because I struggled with it and I love it.
So much of Star Trek is in this book. It's all throughout the book. There are elements of Star Trek. Your love for Burnham is clear in this book. I suggest everyone pick it up. It's wonderfully and beautifully written. It's poignant. It's timely. It's necessary, and it comes out when?
Comes out April 7th, so just a few weeks. And I just want to say on my behalf and also on behalf of Derek's future books, pre-orders help enormously.
Yes, please,
They help
please. Yes,
enormously, and ordering from an indie bookstore in particular, you going in and ordering the book flags for the booksellers. This is a book people are paying attention to, and they may in fact order more copies because of your one order. So this is like you're like the god of book ordering, that you can make a huge difference in a book's life by just ordering one copy from an indie bookstore.
yes, and I can attest to that, because once you pre-order, it tells them, oh well, if I'm pre-ordering and I'm an indie bookseller, maybe I just won't order one. Maybe I'll order 5.
Exactly. And then they
You
put them
know,
out,
and
and
then they put
that
them
means
out. Right?
browsers see them. Browsers see them.
Exactly.
So I just
Exactly.
like
So
for my book, when Derek's next book comes along, a lot of people think they have to wait until the book comes out, but you're actually doing the author a huge, huge, huge favor by having that book come to you in the first week. It's a gift for your future self also, because sometimes you forget you pre-ordered and then it just lands in the mailbox and it's very exciting.
that's right. And I will say that pre-orders helped the autobiography of Benjamin Sisko a great deal. Thank you. So we want pre-orders to help the edge of space-time. We want pre-orders to make this go off the charts. So please pre-order now. We'll put the link in the show notes, and we will push it on all social media platforms. So thank you very much. And finally, I will say, I just want to thank everyone that's here, everyone listening, for your participation in this incredible community. I love having conversations like this with Chanda. And we want to ask, if you're new, to please hit like and subscribe to the show so we can keep this conversation going. And here at Soul the Story, our goal is to always have authentic discussions from an array of different and diverse perspectives. So if you've enjoyed our guests and our conversations, then we ask you to consider supporting the show. Or if you want to get your brand in front of a loyal audience, please, please, please click the link in the show description or visit SyFysisters.com/sponsors to become part of the conversation. Now, our next live show will be next Tuesday, March 28th, and it will be our pre-show for Trek Talks. Once again, Chanda, thank you so much for an incredible and beautiful time and discussion. You've been an amazing, amazing guest, and we want to have you back. Thank you so much for